Hello. Would you like to know how to create fruitful collaborations in order to make the future you desire a reality? Welcome to Happy Sherpas. In today's episode, Virginie receives Sarah Dubreil, researcher and practitioner of systems thinking, and expert in strategically integrating the three horizons into business models.
Hello, Sarah Dubreil. Welcome to Happy Sherpa podcast. We're happy to have you as the first interviewee.
Thank you.
Can you share what motivated you to specialize in systemic approaches and regenerative entrepreneurship?
Thank you very much. And first, thank you very much to you two for inviting me here. So I've been working before for 10 years in the environmental sector as a venture capital investor. So a big bet on technology, rather, deep tech, clean tech. And then working as a venture builder, again in the carbon space. So a big bet here on impact measurement, carbon emissions, putting science inside carbon emission to link it to the finance world. Doing that, I had the impression that it was our methodologies which were failing us. I started to see it very clearly when I started to focus also on nature, planetary boundaries, and the human part of the transition. Our multi-criteria models, our way at looking at things in silo, carbon first, nature then, I think I felt didn't help us to take good decision. And so that's what really led me to leave jobs which were more directly into action, to take a step back and investigate systemic approaches, regenerative approaches linked to former partners that I had in California, which made much more sense to me in terms of decision making. And so for the past 5 years, I started there really trying to build a new company, but actually the right way of working was rather to move into one step into research and one step into supporting concrete projects. So that's what I've been doing for the past 5 years, working both on one side with think tanks, with researchers, so like Club of Rome, HEC, so a report that we're publishing right now, and with the French public bank BPI, and on the other side, more working directly with either collective journeys for business leaders or incubators for entrepreneurs, and bringing a systems approach, regenerative approach as a resource for them to take better decisions. I'm thinking, for example, the Three Horizon workshop that we might talk about later. Where I set up a workshop that I've been doing for now for 800 people. And so that's been really my focus. How do we bring systems and regenerative approach for venture builders and for their financiers?
Okay, so you take the systemic approach and you want to be real in the real economy. And that's why you are testing it in companies and you're also researching. So you have the two hands.
Yes, exactly. I come from deep tech, so it's always about bringing research to the business world.
Very interesting. And so in finance, we often focus on risk and also performance, optimization. And what is the particularity of this systemic approach? It's mostly about interaction, cooperation. So how do you envisage that in respect with finance?
So, and maybe just to say how I get this, what I'm going to say to you. So for the past 4 years, I focused on these systemic approaches both through working with researchers, think tanks, and directly with practitioners in the entrepreneurship and the funds world. And so what had struck me before, as I told you, was that when we looked at the world as investor, we would often consider us as separate from what we were observing. So my impression was that finance could have a look that was rather linear, that looked at the world rather as an observer than as a part of the world, and that we were looking at things as all separate, just as what you say when I was working before, rather in a large corporate on carbon, nature, planetary boundaries. We were looking at each of the impact, but we struggled to look at all of them at the same time. And we all know that, for example, carbon positive solution can be negative for biodiversity. It's the case for example, in the agriculture and food transition. So it really struck me that part of the issue was not about like developing more technologies. I mean, it was relevant, but not for everything. And we had a real issue of obsolescence of our methodologies. So that's what got me into system thinking. And deep diving into system thinking, I went to see rather projects and also researchers, think tanks, to look for alternative methodologies. All of this, and even now, is not completely mature in terms of getting it into the business world. And so it might look sometimes a bit overwhelming. I found very interesting stuff here. And at the same time, I felt like it was really hard to understand. If I took former me working in the business sector, so new me working more in research, found it interesting. But then the question was, how do we make it easy to access? People call it, simplexity, like simple complexity. And I think that's the current threshold. No, we are starting to get to it. People got interested into system thinking and complexity. And right now we are arriving at the moment when really like easy tools are arriving in the entrepreneurial finance world. And what do they allow, which is different from what we are used to do? I'd say that, for example, they can allow you to take more nuanced, more balanced decisions. So former me would use taxonomies to analyze like whether, for example, an activity is green or brown. If you take a systems perspective, you're going to look at the context. So you will ask another question than, is it green, is it brown? You will say, in this context, which dynamic am I reinforcing? Am I contributing to make a cleaner, compliant world with planetary boundaries into reality quicker? Or am I reinforcing the business as usual, which is not compatible with planetary boundaries? So I'd say it helps to take more nuanced decisions. It helps to also balance our focus on quantitative science with qualitative science. We tend to want to measure everything, and at the same time, we are rather less looking at checks and balances. And so here, the idea is really to balance a quantitative approach, measurement approach, which is conventional in the business world, with checks and balances, alignment measurement, polarity measurement, to have a more qualitative and just as rigorous data about how we go forward. And I think that in the financial world, for example, some VC funds such as 2050 are already pioneering the sector with key alignment indicators, for example. And I'd say that out of that, what we get through integrating system thinking is more agency for us as individuals and more agency collectively. Why? Because if you don't consider yourself an observer, if you have the tools to create the future instead of considering that you're waiting for the future to happen, it helps you really have a more active role in what you're doing. And I think that's particularly important when the most probable future is also a dystopia. Then we should not spend our time into predicting and adapting to the worst, but rather trying to build the best.
Yes. So you are taking care of and taking action to the future model you want to see in this world. And you imagine ways of this model to happen with a more cooperation and maybe more qualitative and looking at all parameters altogether, if I get it right. So quality measurement is not the key. It's also assessing global perspective with the planetary boundaries. And so it made me think about the Three Horizon framework that I had the chance to discover last year. And the Three Horizon framework, interesting for corporates that want to think about their strategy and how they can navigate in this uncertain world and distinguish between dominant present, emerging innovation, and also future, desirable future that you just mentioned, that the future that you want to build. How this Three Horizon framework works. Can you explain?
I definitely think when we were talking about simplexity, Three Horizon is just an excellent example. On my side, I discovered it while working on a white paper for a French public bank, BPI, on regenerative approaches. So the Three Horizon framework has been designed by the researcher Bill Sharp from International Future Forum. And so Three Horizons are three ways that the future impact our present. In the conventional business, usually we look at short-term, middle-term, long-term, and that's a very linear way of seeing how it works. And it leads us to say, for example, I've got a plan until 2050. You add a lot of disruptive technologies that will appear in 2045, and we all know it's going to be complex, and so it doesn't help completely. I mean, what's interesting with Three Horizon is you're going to look at it differently. The third horizon is just, as you say, like the future you aspire for, and it's a positive future, like taking into account all that will happen, for example, in 2050, adaptation, resilience, planetary boundaries. What are the visions, the most enthusiastic visions of and viable of this future that could happen in my sector, in my territory, and how can I contribute to it at that time? And so you're going to keep it as a compass. And what's interesting is that the Three Horizon framework helps you understand that it's not just a long-term future. You already have pockets of this future in the present. So you're going to have a look at all the initiatives that already exist that embody this future in the present, although they are very marginal, although they are rather maybe surviving at the extremities of the global system because they cannot be economically viable. But it's interesting because they are already existing, and then you can really feel how it could look like differently. And then your way of seeing innovation and new activities is going to be, in addition to a more conventional way of working on a portfolio of innovation, it's going to be how does this innovation allows my future to come quicker in the present. And so it's much more intentional. You're not just designing a portfolio of innovation so that like a few of them survive and so you can still have revenue here. You're designing it very intentionally so that each of this innovation will be a bridge to bring this aspirational future quicker in the present.
And can you maybe name an example of companies that is applying the Three Horizon framework? How does it work? You go to companies. What do they get out of this?
So since the beginning of this year, I've been doing it with more than 800 people through CEC, so Convention des entreprises pour le climat, which is a collective journey for companies to go from understanding planetary boundaries until drafting a roadmap to go towards a regenerative economy. So we take half a day to work together on the ecosystem according to Three Horizons, your action plan, and also the postures. I'd say that I've been also working on it together more directly with companies. The example, I mean, I use often a few examples to illustrate the different horizons. Would you want to have a focus on that, or rather on what happens during this half day, just to understand?
I think it would be interesting to understand what do they get, what the companies get out of this Three Horizon, and how do they apply it, and does it help to evolve and have a different perspective, maybe a long-term perspective for their activities?
Okay, I understand. So what gets to my mind is a few examples of testimonies. For example, a business leader of Acorus, which is a home renovation company that went through the half-day workshop, gave us as a testimony the fact that they completely reviewed their action plan according to Three Horizons. Why? At the beginning, so you're in home renovation, you're going to rather work on, am I going still to go into new construction or not? And what is my relationship with technology? So they had rather the framing of, okay, maybe we should not go anymore into new construction, because that's not really aligned with the transition. And same question on technology. They were rather thinking about getting a bit less involved with technologies. They were talking about the use of drones, for example. And working on Three Horizon gave a different perspective because it's not about is it black, brown, or is it green? They had more this look of, okay, so the future I yearn for is a future of regenerative buildings, regenerative home for everybody. And so what will really help to bring this future in the present? And here they saw, okay, maybe actually moving out of new construction is not helping such future to come quicker, because other stakeholders are going to come. And so I would be better at selecting a few activities in the new construction where I will continue, and I will be best in class, and I will act as a thought leader. And so here I will stay, but in a more limited area, and really only if I can have a real thought leadership. And it was the same case for the drones. They had this thinking about, okay, using drones, does it reinforce my business as usual, or does it help bringing this future quicker in the present? And the conclusion was that in such case, well, it rather helped bring this vision of a regenerative future quicker in their activity. And so here you see it's very different from thinking, okay, are drones brown or green, which would be a more black and white question. Here you're really looking at, okay, in such context, specific context, in such place, which dynamic am I reinforcing? And so that's a very concrete example. Actually, we've got his testimony in French that is that we registered together. And if I think about use cases, usually people come to me with demands coming from ESG engagements and getting into an activity plan. So coming from a group from ESG and impact and getting into a plan that combines finance, M&A strategy and ESG together. Because thanks to the Three Horizons, you're not anymore trying to convince people. You just set a framework and you work together based on science.
So it helps cooperation
Exactly.
also in the companies so that they understand where they are seated, horizon 1, 2, or 3, and how altogether they are building the future to get to horizon 3, maybe in a more strategic way, and to understand also how their company is organized.
I think it helps a lot for the different internal directions to recognize the positive value of each direction. Each one has a major in one horizon, and so to see the positive values that each of them bring, and at the same time to open the space for the other to grow. So it's really a reconciliation inside the company to avoid polarization.
If a company want to envisage what is this long-term strategy for tomorrow, it's really powerful tool.
Thank you. I'm also very convinced.
And so now, if we talk about adaptation, climate change adaptation, and resilience, how a systemic approach can help in adaptation and resilience? Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, well, thank you. It comes just at the right time because, as we discussed just before, so together with business school HEC Paris, with Prof. Laurence Lehmann, who is specialized in business models, we've just published a white paper where we reviewed 40 organizations that are considered as regenerative pioneers. So what does it mean? Each of them is undertaking a systemic transformation on its sector or on its territory to make it nature positive and people positive, more or less. So we are deeply into systems approach. And what we see is the typical business models are a bit different with what we are used to in decarbonation, in circular economy. And here, I'm just going to mention a few of them. I think the key idea behind it was that there are new ways of doing that comes from adopting a systemic approach in business models, and we need to understand it as an archetype to be able to finance it, to purchase it. The models in itself are a bit unusual for us. For example, we've got a certain set of organizations that we called regenerative system conveners. So we are in front of organization, for example, Savor Institute, an organization linked to agriculture, who have a new narrative of what has value on a sector, on a territory. Here, Savor Institute has a new narrative about how you should manage cattle and extensive agriculture, and worked with agronomists on a regenerative way to handle it. And so you start by a new narrative, and then you're going to try to bring along in a global collective capacity building, both your providers, so here it's the farmers, and the customers, so here it's going to be the large ones. So Savor Institute, for example, is both supporting peer-to-peer learning and practice change learning for farmers to help them change their practice towards more regenerative practices. And they're also helping big brands such as Timberland, for example, to purchase regenerative products with a label and to market it towards their customer. So you see here, we're used to the archetype of marketplace. Marketplace, you take a whole ecosystem, you take the providers, you take the purchaser, you put everybody in competition. But doing so, everybody gets locked in a certain way of doing. Here, what we're doing, using systems approach, is bringing everybody into a new narrative of what has value and really transforming a whole sector. So that's an example. And I'm talking about Savor Institute, but we saw many of them doing that. I'm thinking about Common Land, for example, and landscape regeneration. I'm thinking of Sechem in Egypt, linked to, again, farmers. And in a slightly different way, for example, I'd say that in France, Alenvie was working on how we can refocus the way we handle our elder ones, so can be refocused on care, so both to give them help through nurses and to also have some places to welcome them when they get some mental trouble such as Alzheimer. So in all these cases, you have stakeholders, organizations that start by a new narrative of hope and do collective capacity building. That's an example of a new kind of business model really anchored in systems approach that is currently working on transforming a whole sector towards more adaptation and resilience. I could actually name more. That's the system convener one. We also saw that we had a certain number of place-based models. So we call them regenerative sites or regenerative community enablers. Again, new ways of orchestrating a business model that allows to go towards adaptation and resilience. Here, I could cite quotes, for example, a company which is called Confama, which is kind of conglomerate, actually. It's based in Medellin, in Colombia. So it's a company that was created at the dark hours of Medellin, when both the private sector, the syndicates, and the civil society joined together to set up private but not-for-profit company that would serve all the region of Medellin to help it get basic services and stabilize itself. And so it started as such, and right now it's a large company of more than 500 million euro, and it does banking, education, health centers, it manages national parks. So it's a conglomerate with many different activities which are really in the service of the social and environmental regeneration of the region of Medellin. So you can see it's a completely systemic approach.
We are started just for three entities that needed to talk together to solve a problem.
Three typologies of intelligence, because behind it, when I say private sector, you had, whole groups of local SMEs.
Okay.
And so, but it's really like private sector, civil society, and public unions. I said syndicates, yeah, it's public unions that really joined together and created this group. And now it's a really interesting. It's a kind of company, because if we take France, for example, like we know we're going to have some issues linked to biodiversity loss, linked to adaptation, and we will need, if you want to continue to do business, to have a license to operate, you need stability. These companies are kind of offering stability as a service in some way. So that's, again, another archetype of a different way of integrating a systemic collaborative approach while having a viable economic activity.
That's interesting. So stability by design with collaboration with different partners makes a sustainable model linked to social and environmental aspects. So you said also it helps also adapt to climate change because it's more resilient, because all of those parties communicate, interact, and know how to interact as well. I think more or less understand. I think we have understand clearly what is systematic approach, also three horizons, and business case for adaptation and cooperation and resilience. So that's fantastic with the work with what you're doing, and then looking forward to read the report you mentioned with HAC. Maybe what I would like to know, how do you personally envision the future, and also can you explain to us how are you are a happy Sherpa.
So envisioning the future, I don't know if I guess I guess for me what makes sense here is really to work on my best, the best option I see for the future, and working on it for me makes me deeply happy because I've got the impression of both contributing where part of my talent is and part of what I think is needed for the world to go further. So that I guess that could be an answer. And then I'd say whatever the future is, some way I always take, I think it's a phrase from Veclav Havel which says, hope is not the feeling that things will turn out good. It's the feeling that nothing else that what you're doing makes sense. So I'd say that that's my way of doing.
That's great.
Yes.
Thanks. Last question. Who would you recommend we interview in this podcast?
So we've been talking about system thinking and finance. So for me, the most evident people would be linked to Club of Rome. So as you know, I worked for Club of Rome for 2 years for one of their programs. Club of Rome has been the guys who in the 70s used system thinking to visualize, it was not planetary boundary, but the limits to growth due to environmental boundaries. And so right now, they are working on how system thinking can support a transition in the way we organize our economy and the way we organize our finance. So I would really recommend you to talk directly either with Till Kellerhoff or with Tom Jess, who are program managers of Earth for All for the economy and rethinking finance for the more financial part.
Okay.
And also systemic approach, I think, are attractive to the finance world because part of them come from mathematics. So the finance world tend to take the math. And what's interesting is the guys, for example, you've got a big group of work in MIT currently on systemic investing who takes a mathematical approach. And they are currently arriving to the conclusion that mathematics and modeling will not do everything. You need to go into human sciences, social sciences. And so that's why the person I will recommend you will rather be a person which will represent this part. And I'd say that all this part, which is more focused on human sciences, social sciences, and practice, social change practice, is more linked to Global South. Why? In Global South, we had a much more radical social transformation in the past 50 years than what we had in the Western world. And also you have some practices and traditions that are more linked to systemic approach by design and to nature. And so I would recommend you maybe to go interview in the finance world Sarah Marniès from Agence Française de Développement, so the French Public Development Bank. She works for Campus AFD and she's been hosting podcasts on what she calls like News from Tomorrow, featuring many voices from Global South. And I think we have a lot to learn from such kind of practice because here we are facing people who are already practicing systems approach and who have experiences of transforming sectors and societies in the past 20, 30 years.
I can maybe name the Tantine. It's a collaborative approach to finance projects. It's in Africa, for example. It's a good way of collaboration and also helping social issues. So thank you so much, Sarah, for your time. We really appreciate, and I think we learned a lot during this podcast. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.